My uncle used to say something I never really paid attention to when I was younger. He said the most dangerous people in the world weren't the ones who looked dangerous. He said the ones you had to watch out for were the ones who looked like they had it all together, the ones with the nice cars and the easy smiles and the way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. He said those people were the ones who knew exactly what they were doing and had practiced doing it on a lot of people before they ever got to you. I used to think he was just being paranoid or maybe bitter about something that happened to him that he never fully talked about. Now I think he was the smartest person I ever knew, and I just didn't have the sense to realize it until it almost cost me everything. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 26 years old. I live in Garland, Texas, which is one of those suburbs outside Dallas that people who don't live there tend to forget exists, even though about 250,000 people call it home. I have lived here my whole life. I know every road and every strip mall and every neighborhood in a 20-mile radius the way you know a place when you've driven its streets for years in every kind of weather and every time of day and night, which is what happens when you do gig delivery work for a living. I drive for several of the apps, DoorDash primarily, but also Uber Eats and Instacart, when I need to fill in the gaps, and I've been doing it for about 3 years now. Before that, I worked at a distribution warehouse in Mesquite, but the hours were destroying me and the pay wasn't substantially better than what I could make behind the wheel on my own schedule, so I made the switch. It is not glamorous work, and I won't tell you it is. You spend a lot of time alone in your car listening to music and podcasts and the occasional audiobook if you're in the right mood for it. You deal with restaurant staff who treat you like furniture. You figure out quickly which neighborhoods tip and which ones don't, and you stop being surprised by either. The car is mine. A 2019 Nissan Sentra with 140,000 miles on it that I maintain carefully because it is how I earn my living and I cannot afford for it to not work. Nobody tells me when to start or stop. I decide when I'm done for the day and I decide when I need to push through to make the numbers work. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Garland with my roommate Devin, who works at a print shop and who I've known since high school. My mom is in Mesquite, which is about 15 minutes away depending on traffic, and I see her on Sundays for dinner most weeks, which is a rhythm we established when I moved out at 22, and that has continued because it works for both of us. I don't have a large social circle. I have Devin and a group of 5 or 6 guys I play basketball with on Wednesday evenings at a park near the apartment complex, and that's mostly it in terms of consistent human contact. I'm not an antisocial person. I just never had a natural talent for accumulating friends the way some people did. In school, I was always the guy who was friendly with everyone and genuinely close with nobody, which sounds lonelier than it actually felt most of the time. You get used to your own company when your work is mostly solitary, and I've made peace with mine. I want to tell you about my mom before I get into the rest of it, because her role in what happened is important. And I want you to understand who she is before I tell you what she said and what I did with what she said. My mom's name is Diane Webb, and she is 51 years old, and she works as a medical billing specialist at a clinic in Mesquite, which she has done for 14 years. She is not a dramatic person. She is the least dramatic person I know, in fact, in the sense that she does not catastrophize or exaggerate or imagine crises that aren't there. When I switched from warehouse work to gig driving, she didn't tell me it was a mistake. She asked practical questions about my health insurance situation and my car maintenance budget, and helped me work through the numbers. When I had a rough few months last year, when the money was tight, she helped me with 2 months of rent without making a production of it or attaching conditions to the help. When my dad left when I was 11, she managed that situation with a composure that I only fully appreciated once I was old enough to understand how hard composure was. She is practical and calm, and she has good judgment about people. Not perfect judgment. Nobody has that but good and honest and arrived at through genuine observation rather than assumption. I trust her read on things more than I trust most other people's because I have watched it be correct repeatedly over the course of my life. So when she told me she had a bad feeling about Vanessa, I should have listened. I knew I should have listened even when I was dismissing what she said. That's the honest thing to say about it. I heard her and I understood what she meant, and I told myself she was being overprotective, and I kept doing what I was doing, and that almost cost me my life. I met Vanessa Torres in December of last year. I was doing a delivery in the Firewheel area, one of the newer residential developments in Garland, where the houses are bigger and the yards are maintained and the HOA signs are prominent along the entrance road. I had a food order for an address on a cul-de-sac, one of those curved, dead-end streets where all the houses face each other across a small circular road. I rang the bell and a woman answered who I initially thought was the customer, but turned out to be the customer's sister. The customer, an older woman in her 30s, came to the door a moment later with her wallet, and the woman who had answered, Vanessa, stepped back to make room. But before she stepped back, she said something I don't even remember what it was now. Some small observation about the restaurant the food was from, or the neighborhood, or something equally inconsequential, and the way she said it made me look at her directly instead of at the app on my phone. She was attractive in a natural, unaffected way. The kind of good-looking that came from taking care of yourself, rather than from effort and performance. She was maybe 24 or 25 with dark hair and the kind of energy that was both relaxed and engaged, simultaneously the rarer combination. We talked for maybe 3 minutes while the payment cleared, just small talk. Nothing that you could point to and say that was the moment. But when the payment went through and I had to leave, she asked if I was on Instagram. I gave her my handle and she followed me while I was still standing at the door, and I followed her back. And that was how it started. We exchanged messages for about a week before we met up in person. I looked at her profile before we met, which is what you do, and what I found was consistent with what I would have expected from a normal 24-year-old woman who was reasonably active online. About 4,000 followers, which was enough to seem like a real person and not enough to seem like someone who was performing. Her posts were a mix of outdoor content, hiking photos and lake days and camping pictures in various locations around Texas, and once what looked like Colorado, and normal life content, food and her dog and things she found funny. She posted about her work as a fitness instructor, linking to classes she was teaching at various studios in the Plano and Allen area. The photos with other people showed different groups in different settings, the organic social media profile of someone with a real life. The coffee date went well. Better than well, honestly. She was genuinely easy to talk to in the way that took me a little while to identify, because it wasn't something I ran into often. The quality of it was that she was actually listening when I talked, rather than waiting for her turn, which sounds like a low bar, but isn't in practice. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered things I had said in messages and referenced them in conversation. We talked for almost 2 hours at a place in Richardson that she suggested, a small coffee shop that turned out to be about 100 feet from a studio where she taught a class on Saturday mornings. And when we left, she said she'd had a really good time, and she meant it in a way that I could tell she meant it. I was coming out of a difficult period when I met her. I had been with a woman named Priya for about 1.5 years, and we had broken up the previous summer. The breakup was mutual in the official story of it, but in practice more her idea than mine, and I had spent the months after it doing the thing that people did when they didn't want to deal with their feelings, which was staying busy. I was working too many hours. I was sleeping badly. I was eating poorly and not exercising and spending too much time on my phone and calling Devin a good substitute for actual social connection when it wasn't quite the same thing. Meeting Vanessa felt like the first genuinely good development in about 6 months. And I think that feeling of finally something good is going right made me less careful than I should have been. When you've been operating in a deficit for a while and something positive appears, your instinct is to hold on to it rather than question it. That instinct is understandable, and it is also exploitable by people who know what they're doing. We spent time together over the following 2 months, always casually, always in public places or at events with other people. A bar in Uptown with her friends. A Saturday morning at a farmer's market in McKinney that she had mentioned wanting to check out. A movie which she had suggested when she saw something I'd posted on my story about wanting to see a specific film. The rhythm of it felt natural and unforced, the kind of thing that built itself rather than requiring management. She introduced me to her friends gradually. The core group seemed to be Jade, Ryan, Trevor, and Cole, with others who appeared and disappeared at various events. Jade was sharp and funny, the kind of woman who made cutting observations about things in a way that was more perceptive than mean. Ryan was one of those people who made you feel like you'd known him for years within 20 minutes of meeting him, the socially fluent type who had clearly practiced the fluency enough that it was now genuine. Trevor was quieter, more observational, the kind of person who didn't say much, but who, you got the impression, was tracking everything. Cole I met later than the others. At a different event, and he had a similar quality to Ryan but with less warmth behind it, friendliness without the genuine interest underneath. One thing I noticed about all of them was money without obvious source. Not flashy money, not the kind that made you uncomfortable or called attention to itself, just the ordinary background presence of financial ease. Nice cars, nice clothes, apartments in better neighborhoods than their stated jobs should have supported. Vanessa told me she was a fitness instructor and she drove a relatively new Jeep Grand Cherokee that seemed like a lot of car for the income. Ryan had mentioned marketing vaguely. Jade said social media management. I turned these details over once or twice and then stopped because the explanations were plentiful and ordinary. Family money, side hustles, supplemental income from investments, or a partner who earned more. These were all normal things, and I had no specific reason to apply suspicion, rather than any of those explanations. My mom met Vanessa the way things like this happened by accident. I was at my mom's house picking up some containers she'd sent food home with me the previous Sunday, and I had forgotten to take back, and Vanessa texted while I was in the kitchen, and I lit up when I saw the name on the screen in a way that my mom, who notices things, noticed. She asked who I was texting. I told her and showed her the Instagram. My mom held the phone and looked at the profile for maybe 30 seconds and handed it back to me and said she seems very put together. I said, yeah, she really is. My mom said, maybe too put together. I asked what she meant. She said she couldn't explain it exactly. She said the photos felt like a performance rather than a life, which was something she acknowledged could apply to a lot of people's social media, but that there was something else she couldn't name, a quality to the presentation that made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't articulate. She said she'd feel better if she actually met Vanessa, and I said I'd make it happen. And I didn't make it happen because making it happen would have meant bringing those two parts of my life into contact in a way that felt premature, and that I now understand I was also avoiding because some part of me was protecting the thing with Vanessa from scrutiny. Devin, who had met Vanessa a couple of times when she picked me up from the apartment, thought she was great and had been telling me for weeks that I should stop taking things slow because I was going to lose her to someone who moved faster. Devin is one of my closest friends and one of the most genuinely good-hearted people I know, and he is perhaps not the world's most discerning judge of character, having cycled through a remarkable variety of unsuitable partners in the time we've lived together, and managed to be surprised by each new development, as if there had been no preceding evidence. His enthusiasm for Vanessa was not the most reassuring endorsement, is what I'm saying, but it was genuine and I appreciated it. In March, Vanessa brought up the camping trip. She mentioned it in the context of a longer conversation about summer plans, what we were both looking forward to when the weather got consistently good. She said she and her friends did an outdoor weekend every year, sometimes camping, sometimes a lake house, and that this year they were planning something in the hill country near Fredericksburg in late April, before the summer heat became unreasonable. She said her friends liked me and that she'd been thinking it would be fun if I came along. I said I was interested, and I genuinely was. I had done camping as a kid, state park trips with my mom, and a scout troop I was briefly part of in middle school, and the hill country was country I had driven through, but never spent real time in. The timing was workable because April tended to be decent for delivery income, and I'd been building up some savings. And I was at a point with Vanessa where spending a weekend with her and her friends felt like the right next step in the natural progression of things. I told my mom about it maybe 2 weeks after Vanessa mentioned it. My mom asked the practical question she always asked: where exactly we were going, how we were getting there, who else would be there, how long we'd be gone. I answered them as well as I could, which wasn't completely because I didn't have all the specifics yet. She asked if I had the address of the campsite, and I said Vanessa was going to send it closer to the date. She said to make sure I had it before I left and to send it to her. Then she said something I have replayed many times in the month since. She said, Marcus, something about this is making me nervous, and I don't know why. She said she knew it might be nothing. She said she trusted my judgment. She said, please be careful and please check in when you get there. I told her I would. I told her it was going to be fine. I said I would send the address. I meant all of it when I said it. In the week before the trip, Vanessa sent a group chat with the details. It was 9 people total, including me, Vanessa, Jade, Ryan, Cole, Trevor, and 3 people I hadn't met yet, a woman named Sasha and 2 men named Marcus, one of whom was me, and one of whom was a guy named Marcus Ellis from Fort Worth, who I had not previously encountered. The coordinates Vanessa sent were in Gillespie County, about 2 hours and 15 minutes southwest of Garland on private land that belonged to a family connected to Ryan. The description was of a property in the hill country with established fire pits and basic shelters, the kind of semi-developed private land that serious outdoor people in Texas maintained as a retreat. The week before the trip, I was busy with deliveries and with getting ready, and with the 100 ordinary logistics of being gone for a weekend. And every day I thought I would send my mom the address, and every day I got to the end of the day without having done it. This was not a decision to not send it. It was the ordinary human failure of intending to do a thing and not doing it, which is the kind of failure that seems trivial right up until the moment when it isn't. We left on a Friday afternoon. Vanessa picked me up from my apartment at 2 o'clock in her Jeep. In the car were me in the front passenger seat, Ryan and Jade in the back. The other 5 members of the group were in a separate vehicle, a black Chevrolet Suburban that I saw when we stopped for gas about 45 minutes into the drive. Cole was driving it. Sasha and the other Marcus Ellis, were in it as well. There was also a man in the back seat who I hadn't seen before, older than the rest of the group, maybe 45 to 50, with a gray-streaked beard and a compact, solid build, and sunglasses on, even though it was overcast outside. He didn't get out at the gas station. He sat in the back seat and looked at his phone, and he never looked up when I was watching him through the window. Trevor, I noticed, was not in either vehicle. I mentioned this to Vanessa, and she said he'd had something come up and might join later, which was a plausible explanation, and which I accepted. The drive got progressively more rural as we went southwest. The interstate to US 290, and then onto the smaller state roads, and then onto county roads, and finally onto a gravel track and then a dirt track, through cedar and live oak that required slowing to a near walk to navigate. The cell service dropped out completely about 40 minutes before we arrived. I noted this and made a mental note to check when we got to the campsite and to text my mom if I had a signal. We arrived around 5:15 in the afternoon. The property was in a shallow hollow between 2 cedar-covered limestone hills with a small creek running along the eastern edge that I could hear but not fully see from the cleared central area. Someone had developed the clearing years ago and then stopped maintaining it. There were established fire pits and a large open shelter structure with a corrugated metal roof and wooden posts, the kind of thing you built once and expected to last. There was a smaller enclosed building about the size of a large equipment shed with a padlocked door. There was a third structure further back in the trees that I could make out as a shape, but not identify clearly in the fading afternoon light. I noticed the cameras when I was helping unload gear from the Jeep. There were two of them mounted on the shelter structure positioned to cover the central cleared area. They were not the small trail cameras that landowners in Texas commonly used for wildlife monitoring and security. They were larger and more sophisticated, with small red indicator lights and cables running to a weatherproof equipment box mounted below the roof. I pointed them out to Vanessa and asked about them. She said Ryan's family used them to monitor the property when nobody was there, that it was a security measure. This was a plausible explanation for the kind of rural Texas property that people worried about trespassers using when the owners weren't present, and I let it go. The evening unfolded the way camping evenings unfolded. Fire built, food prepared and eaten, drinks opened and passed around. The conversations were easy, the group comfortable with each other in the way of people who had done this kind of thing together before. Ryan and Cole had a long shared history that surfaced in running jokes and shorthand references that occasionally required explanation, but that were funny even when you didn't know the origin. Jade was entertaining and observant, and consistently made me see things I'd said or noticed from a slightly different angle. Sasha was warm and a little quieter than the others. The kind of person who listened more than she talked, but who you could tell was engaged with everything happening around her. The older man from the Suburban, whose name I eventually pieced together from context as Earl, maintained a position at the edge of the group's activity throughout the evening. He ate and drank alongside everyone else, but he didn't participate in conversation in any meaningful way, and nobody seemed to find this strange or worth remarking on, which I noticed but attributed to him just being that kind of person, the type who was more comfortable observing than engaging. At some point after dinner, he got up and walked to the enclosed shed building and went inside, and didn't come back out. The other Marcus Ellis was the thing I kept returning to in my thoughts as the evening went on. He had been perfectly friendly when we arrived, the normal friendliness of a stranger in a group situation, and he had participated in the early conversation around the fire without any obvious awkwardness. But as the evening progressed, he got quieter, and not in the way of someone relaxing into the setting. His eyes moved around the group differently. At a certain point, I happened to be next to him when everyone else was occupied with something else, and I asked him how he knew the group. He said he had met Vanessa through a friend from his gym about 2 months ago. I asked which friend. He gave a name I didn't recognize. I asked how many of these outdoor weekends he had been on. He said this was his first. Then he asked me the same questions in reverse. I told him I'd met Vanessa in December through a delivery. He asked how long ago the camping trip was suggested. I said March. He said Vanessa had mentioned it to him in March, too. We looked at each other for a moment, and neither of us said the thing that was in the space between us. About half an hour later, I found an opportunity to check my phone. I had 1 bar of service. I looked at my mom's contact and I thought about texting her the address. Then Ryan called over asking me something about the fire, and I put my phone back in my pocket and went to the fire, and I told myself I would text her before I went to sleep. I did not text her before I went to sleep. The drinks kept coming in that particular way of a social evening, where you don't realize how much you've had because each one appeared before you finished the previous one. By 9:30 or 10, I was in the comfortable, heavy-limbed state that too much alcohol on a warm evening produced. And when Vanessa said she wanted to turn in and get up early for a hike, I went with her to the tent and was asleep within what felt like minutes of lying down. I woke up at 3:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone immediately. Vanessa was not in the tent. Her sleeping bag was empty and the tent zipper was open to a 4-inch gap at the top, the way it would look if someone had left through it carefully, trying not to wake the person still inside. I lay still for a full minute, doing the calibration of waking up in an unfamiliar place in the dark, the process of accounting for where you are and why and what you're supposed to be doing. My mouth was dry and my head was heavy in the particular way of too much alcohol and not enough sleep. And I breathed through it and listened. The creek to the east of the clearing, the cedar moving in a light wind, the fire completely out now, no sound from it. The ordinary nighttime sounds of a property in the Texas Hill Country. Then something from the direction of the enclosed building. A sound that I am still not able to describe adequately, even after many months of trying. It was not a scream in the way that the word scream suggests, the full-throated, involuntary kind. It was more compressed than that, the sound of something intense being suppressed, and it had in it a human quality that was unmistakable. It came through 40 feet of open air and the wooden walls of a shed building, and it still raised every hair on my body. I got out of the tent. The cleared area was empty. The fire was cold ash. The sky was clear and full of stars that provided more light than you got in the city, enough to see the shapes of things. The enclosed building was across the clearing from the shelter maybe 40 feet, and there was a thin line of light at the base of its door. The padlock I had noticed when we arrived was not on the door. The door was closed, but it had been left unlocked. I stood in the clearing for what was probably 30 seconds, but felt like much longer doing the internal argument that I have replayed and interrogated many times since. Part of me was already saying, "Don't do this." That part had been accumulating inputs all evening. The cameras, Earl's peripheral position, the conversation with Marcus Ellis. The way none of the group had asked the obvious questions about the cameras when I pointed them out. That part was saying that these things were connected and that walking toward that building was the wrong direction. The other part was saying that none of the specific things I had observed were necessarily alarming on their own, and that there was probably a normal explanation, and that Vanessa was probably in that building for a normal reason. The sound came a second time, shorter, cut off in a way the first one hadn't been, which was the detail that decided me. I walked toward the building. I was close to the door when it opened. Vanessa stepped out. She was wearing clothes I hadn't seen her in before, darker and more practical than what she'd been in around the fire. She had a small flashlight. She stopped when she saw me standing in the clearing looking at her, and her face moved through something fast and complicated, several expressions cycling in the space of a second. And what landed was a version of her normal, easy friendliness that didn't match the circumstances of standing outside a locked shed at 4 in the morning. She said my name like a question. She asked what I was doing up. I said I heard something and I wanted to know what was in the building. She said it was equipment that Earl kept there, that it sometimes made sounds. She said to come back to the tent and not worry about it. I said I wanted to see what was in the building. She looked at me for a moment and then she said, "Okay." She pushed the door open and stepped back to let me go through first. I went through the door. The building was a single rectangular space, larger than it looked from outside, maybe the size of a one-car garage. 3 cameras on adjustable stands positioned to cover different zones of the room. Multiple monitor screens on a folding table against the far wall, showing feeds from different cameras, including one of the exterior, the campsite, visible in a small window in the corner of one of the screens. The cameras were running. The red indicator lights were on. Against the far wall, seated on the concrete floor with their wrists secured behind them, around a vertical metal pipe, were 3 people: Marcus Ellis, Sasha, a man I didn't recognize, mid-30s with a confused expression that told me he was still catching up to the situation. Marcus Ellis's eyes came to me immediately. His expression was the controlled, measured expression of someone who had already processed what was happening and was calculating the variables. I turned around. Cole was in the doorway behind me. He had a taser. Ryan was beside him. Ryan looked nothing like the friendly, easygoing person from the evening. He had the flat, attentive expression of someone doing a job, and that expression was more frightening than any amount of hostility would have been, because hostility has feeling behind it, and what Ryan had in his face had no feeling at all. Vanessa said, "Sit down." I said no. Cole pressed the taser against my side and I sat down. They secured my wrists around the same pipe. Their technique was practiced and quick, the heavy-duty zip ties applied tightly and efficiently, and within 2 minutes they were gone. Vanessa last, and the door was locked from outside. The 4 of us occupied the silence for a while before anyone spoke. I think we all needed those minutes. Eventually, I told the room my name. Marcus Ellis said his. Sasha said hers. The man I didn't recognize said his name was David Mercer, and he was from Plano, and he had met Ryan at a networking event in January, and had been introduced to the broader group over the following months, and had been invited to this camping weekend about 3 weeks ago. All 4 of us had come through different entry points. Different people who had recruited us into different levels of apparent relationship over periods of 2 to 4 months before bringing us here. The cameras were on us the whole time. The red indicator lights burned steadily. I kept thinking about who was watching and what they were watching for and why they needed to watch it, and the answers that came to me were not answers I wanted to sit with. About 45 minutes after they left us, Earl came in alone. He set up a laptop on the folding table without speaking to us, or acknowledging our questions, or responding to anything we said. He worked efficiently, and when he was done, he left without looking at us. The laptop was streaming something. A live feed from what appeared to be another room in another location entirely, a similar setup to this one, and in that room there were other people in a similar situation. People who didn't want to be there, who had been brought to a place with cameras and were now on a screen being watched by an audience whose size and location I had no way of knowing. The feed was professional quality. This was not someone with a consumer device. This was people who had done this before and had the equipment and the infrastructure to do it reliably. Marcus Ellis said, "Don't look at the screen." Sasha and David both looked at him. He said they want us watching it. That's why they put it there. Don't give them that. He was right. The laptop had been positioned specifically for us to see it angled toward us rather than toward the wall or the ceiling. The watching was part of the content. Somewhere people were watching us watch something, and the reaction was what they were there for. I understood this, and I looked away from the screen, and I started looking at the room instead. At the structural elements and the camera positions and the door and the ceiling and the floor, because the room was the problem that was actually in front of me and needed solving. The beam our wrists were secured to was solid structural metal. The zip ties were the heavy-duty variety, the kind you couldn't break with simple tension and the right motion. The cameras were mounted too high to reach without getting loose first. The door was locked from outside with what sounded like a bolt rather than a keyed lock. The ceiling was low corrugated metal on wooden joists. Sasha was crying. I told her I needed her to stop for a minute, and I felt the full weight of how terrible that was to say, even as I was saying it. But we didn't have time. She stopped and I thanked her, and she started quietly studying the ceiling, the way I was studying everything. The practical, focused attention of someone who had decided to do something rather than wait. David was working his wrists methodically against the zip ties. Marcus Ellis was doing the same. I joined them. None of us were making progress. After approximately an hour and a half, measured by the time visible on the laptop screen, Ryan came back into the room. He was alone. He crouched in front of the four of us, and he said that one of us was going to be moved to another room, and he was going to let us choose. He said if we didn't choose within 5 minutes, he would choose. Nobody spoke immediately. David asked why one person needed to be moved. Ryan said because their audience was waiting and they didn't keep their audience waiting. He said this with the same flat professional quality as everything else he had said in here, without any apparent awareness of what the words meant about him as a person. Marcus Ellis said, "Take me." I said no. He said it again more clearly and more finally, the way you said something when you had already thought it through and arrived at your position and were not offering it for debate. I understood what he was doing. He was trying to remove the decision from the group, because having the decision in the group was its own kind of harm. The particular harm of being asked to participate in something that shouldn't require your participation. He was trying to spare the rest of us that. It was one of the more significant things I have ever witnessed a person do, and I have thought about it often in the months since. I said nobody is going anywhere voluntarily. Ryan stood up and called toward the door. Cole came in with the taser and a fresh zip tie, and the communication was clear enough. And then Sasha moved. She didn't say anything before she did it. She just threw her full body weight sideways using her shoulder and her hip and everything she had, pulling simultaneously against the zip tie and against the beam, and the violence of the motion moved the beam. Not free from the floor, it was bolted there, but the top of it shifted. And when it shifted, I saw that the connection at the ceiling was not a weld, but a bolt into a wooden joist, and the wood was old and dry and had given enough to show daylight between the beam and the joist housing. She had been studying the ceiling while the rest of us were working our wrists. She had found the weakness while I was doing what they expected me to be doing, which was what the weakness in their setup counted on. Marcus Ellis threw himself sideways immediately, the same direction, the same violent motion, and I followed, and David followed, and on the third combined throw, the bolt pulled free from the wood above, and the beam tilted hard toward us, and we went down with it to the floor, and our hands were in front of us instead of behind us, still secured around the beam, but the beam now horizontal and loose. Cole tased David. David hit the ground and went rigid and didn't get up immediately. Ryan grabbed for Sasha, and she swung the free end of the beam at him with both hands, the motion wild and strong, and it connected with his shoulder, and he slammed back against the wall. I got to the folding table and grabbed the laptop, which was the heaviest thing within reach, and I hit Cole across the side of the head with it while he was pulling the taser back toward him. The laptop broke across his skull and he went down hard. Marcus Ellis got to Ryan before Ryan recovered from hitting the wall. The door was open within seconds. I grabbed the taser from where Cole had dropped it. We got David up from the floor. He was dazed and shaking, but he was moving. We went through the door into the open air. Outside it was deep pre-dawn dark, maybe 5 in the morning, based on the horizon beginning to show the first suggestion of gray. The campsite was quiet. I didn't see Vanessa or Earl or any of the others. Both vehicles were still in the position they had been parked. For a moment I thought about taking one of them, and then I thought about the keys, and about the fact that trying to find keys was time we didn't have. I said woods or road. Marcus Ellis said woods first, then parallel to the road. Stay off the road until we know what's behind us. We went into the cedar. The next 2 hours are something I can describe factually, but not fully. I'll tell you what happened without going into everything I felt about it while it was happening, because some of that is still mine and not ready to be anybody else's yet. We heard them searching for us for a while, voices calling, and at one point headlights moving on the dirt track to our south. We moved through the dark cedar scrub in the direction Marcus Ellis navigated, using the stars which he knew because he had grown up camping with his father and his grandfather, and had learned celestial navigation as a practical skill rather than a romantic one, and I was more grateful for this than I can adequately explain. Sasha had twisted her ankle badly on a route in the dark and couldn't put full weight on it. Marcus Ellis and I took turns with her, one of us, on each side, moving as fast as we could manage. David recovered more fully as we walked, the taser effects clearing from his system. Though the burns on his side from the contact were serious and clearly painful, and he moved with the controlled, careful way of someone managing real pain and choosing to manage it rather than be stopped by it. When we reached the county road, it was full light, or nearly the early gray gold of just before sunrise. We had been in the cedar for almost 2.5 hours. I had 1 bar of service. I called 911. I gave them the coordinates from the group chat, which I still had in my messages, and I described what had happened as clearly and completely as I could to the dispatcher, who asked me to stay on the line and kept asking me questions to keep me talking. Then I called my mom. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Marcus, what happened?" She said it before I had said a single word, just from the quality of my breathing or my silence or something she heard in the pickup that told her. She just knew. I told her where I was. I told her I was okay. I told her what had happened in the outline of it. She said she was coming. I said the police were coming, and she said she understood that, and she was still coming. She drove 2.5 hours to reach a county road in Gillespie County, Texas, at 6:30 in the morning because that is where her son called her from, and she arrived before the situation was fully contained. The Gillespie County Sheriff's Department came first, and then additional units, and then investigators from multiple agencies over the following days, as the scope of what had been found on the property became clearer. They went to the campsite with the coordinates I had provided. They found the tents and the fire pits and the shelter structure with the cameras mounted on it. They found the enclosed building with the monitoring equipment inside the laptop I had broken across Cole's skull, still on the floor, the camera stands and the cables and the folding table and the structural beam that had come loose from the ceiling joist. They found evidence of people having been restrained in the building, the bolt holes and the fragments and the marks on the concrete. They found other things in and around the property that I was briefed on in partial terms, and that I am not going to describe here in detail. The investigators were careful about what they told me, and I think they were right to be careful, because some of what I was told I am still working on, being able to hold without it becoming the primary thing I think about. And giving it more specificity here would not serve anyone. They did not find Ryan or Cole or Vanessa or Earl or any of the others. The vehicles were gone. The tracks in the dirt indicated they had left in the window between when we fled and when law enforcement arrived. The operation they dismantled in that building was not the only such operation, which became clear over the following weeks as investigators connected what they had found to other things they had been aware of or had been investigating through different paths. The four of us gave full and detailed statements. The investigators showed us photographs over multiple sessions, and we identified the people we had encountered. The names Vanessa Torres and Ryan and Cole that these people had used did not correspond to real people in any database that investigators could access, which they told me was indicative of professional-level constructed identity rather than amateur name changes. Trevor, the quiet observer from the bar who had not been present at the campsite, turned out to be known to law enforcement in a different context. I was not given specifics. There were missing persons reports filed in the same weekend from 3 other counties in central Texas that investigators believed were connected to the same network. 2 of those cases had outcomes that I was given some information about, and that I am not going to speak to here because the families of those people deserve that information to remain with them and not be processed through my account of my own experience. Marcus Ellis and I have stayed in contact. He is doing okay in the way that people do okay after something like this, which is not the same as fine but is real and sustainable. We went to a Rangers game in June and watched baseball and didn't talk about the camping trip or anything connected to it, which was exactly the right thing to do. We text periodically. He sends me things he finds funny, which I appreciate more than I know how to say. David Mercer sends me a text on the 5th of each month because that was the date of the camping weekend. It's just a check-in. Nothing specific. Sometimes just his name and an emoji, sometimes a brief update about how things are going. I send something back every time. We have talked on the phone twice. He is working with a therapist and he's back at his job and he is building his life back into something recognizable, which takes longer than you want it to, but which does happen. Sasha, I have spoken to once a phone call about a month after the incident. She was with family and she sounded careful in the way of someone who was being protective of herself and knew it and was right to be. I told her that what she figured out about the ceiling beam saved all of us, which was true, and she said she didn't want to think about it, which I understood, and we ended the call. I hope she is doing well. I think about her. I am back to doing deliveries. I started again about 6 weeks after the camping trip because the rent didn't pause, and the car payment didn't pause, and the practical requirements of life don't take extended breaks on your behalf. The first few weeks back were strange. The ordinariness of the work sitting next to everything that had happened in a way that required some management. I would be in the middle of a perfectly routine delivery, and something small would knock me sideways, a particular smell or a quality of light that connected to a moment I was still processing, and I would have to take a minute in the parking lot before continuing. It got easier. It continues to get easier. I am working with someone about everything that happened, and that is helping. I have good days and I have bad days, and the good days are more frequent now than they were in June, and I expect that to continue. My mom and I have dinner on Sundays. I always text her when I'm on my way and when I arrive and when I'm leaving to go home. This is a new thing and it is going to stay a new thing. I share my location with her when I'm going somewhere new. This is also a new thing and it is going to stay a new thing. I think about her telling me she had a bad feeling about Vanessa and not being able to name what it was. I think about that being the honest and accurate experience of real intuition, which is not named and explained, which is the feeling of something wrong that the brain has registered before it has the evidence to support the conclusion. I dismissed it because it wasn't articulate enough for me to take seriously. I know now that inarticulate is what intuition is, that it precedes the evidence because it is picking up on signals too faint or too numerous to be individually identified, and that this makes it more trustworthy rather than less. I think about my uncle. He said the most dangerous people were the ones who looked like they had it all together, the ones with the easy smiles and the way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was right. Vanessa was exactly that. Ryan was exactly that. The whole apparatus of it was designed to look like a real life, a real social circle, a real connection. And it did look like that for months because they were very good at it, and because I was in a state where I wanted it to be real. I think about Marcus Ellis quietly studying the ceiling while the rest of us were doing what we'd been led to expect we would do, which was struggle against the immediate restraint rather than look for the structural failure. I think about Sasha, who I had asked to stop crying twice while she was doing the most useful thing any of us did in that building. And I think about the bar of service on my phone when we arrived at the campsite. One bar, enough to send a text. I thought about sending my mom the address, and I put my phone back in my pocket, and I went to where Ryan had called me over, and I told myself I'd send it later, and I didn't. And what I have thought about most often in the month since is what the shape of that night would have looked like if she had known where I was. Whether law enforcement would have arrived before we were moved somewhere else. Whether the outcome for the people I didn't know, the ones whose cases resolved in ways I can't describe here, might have been different. I don't know the answer to that. I live with not knowing. What I know is this. When someone who loves you and who has consistently good judgment tells you they have a bad feeling about something and they can't explain why, that is not a reason to dismiss it. It is a reason to listen more carefully. The inability to explain it is not weakness in the feeling, it is the nature of how the feeling works. The people who care about you are sometimes ahead of you on information they cannot articulate, and your job is to take that seriously, rather than require them to build the case first. Send the address before you go. Share your location before you leave. Text when you get there. These are not difficult things. They are also not things you think about when everything feels fine, which is exactly when they matter most. I'm back to driving. My car has 150,000 miles on it now, and it still runs. My mom is making tamales for Sunday dinner this week, and I'm looking forward to it. Marcus Ellis texted me last week about a Rangers game in September. Devin has a new girlfriend who seems genuinely good for him and who he might be right about for once. Life is continuing in the way that life continued. I'm in it, and I'm glad to be in it, and I don't take that for granted anymore. Please be careful out there. Please send the address. Please listen when someone who loves you says they have a bad feeling they can't name. Those things matter more than you know until they matter more than anything.